Audio is live.
The United States isn't waiting. We are resolving to take action. Not only with our federal government, but our cities and our states all across our country. Small businesses, large corporations, American workers in every field. I see an opportunity to create millions of good-paying, middle-class union jobs. I see line workers running thousands of miles of transmission lines for a clean, modern, resilient grid. I see auto workers going to the next generation of electric vehicles.
Password you can
nationwide
live space,
for
no caps.
500,000 charging
Live space,
stations
all one.
on our
No caps.
highways.
Live space, no caps.
There's no turning back. By maintaining those investments and putting these people to work, the United States sets out on the road to cut the greenhouse gases in
2 minutes
half,
left on video.
in half by the end of this decade. That's where we're headed as a nation. And that's what we can do. We can take action to build an economy that's not only more prosperous, but healthier, fairer, and cleaner for the entire planet.
Last year, I announced the Michigan Clean Water Plan, a $500 million investment in Michigan's water infrastructure. Direct dollars to communities for safe, clean water to residents. And it supports over 7,500 Michigan jobs.
To pass these bills so we can start rebuilding Michigan's water infrastructure.
You know, those that do take action and make bold investments in their people and clean energy future will win the good jobs of tomorrow and make their economies more resilient and more competitive.
Workers power our economy. Labor will lift them up. It's on us in Congress to put those priorities in place, and that's exactly what the Thrive Agenda will do.
The countries that take decisive action now to create the industries of the future will be the ones that reap the economic benefits of the clean energy boom that's coming. We have to take action, all of us.
Parents and children should not have to worry about air quality when taking our kids to the park around the corner or when we fill up water from the tap. So because of that, the governor and I want to make sure that people who are impacted most directly and most deeply by the challenges that we face, that you are at the table when it comes to addressing environmental justice.
If we do, we'll breathe easier, literally and figuratively. We'll create good jobs here at home for millions of Americans and lay a strong foundation for growth for the future.
Please welcome National Wildlife Federation Vice President of Environmental Justice, Climate, and Community Revitalization, Mustafa Santiago Ali.
Welcome everyone to the Great American Build Tour. We are super excited. We're blessed because we're bringing together some of the best to walk us through how do we win on climate change? How do we make sure that the clean economy is one that lifts everyone up and gives us an opportunity to make sure that we are not only building wealth inside of communities, but that we are also helping to protect our planet at the same time. I want to thank the League of Conservation Voters, Climate Power, Senators Peters and Stabenow will be with us, my Michigan family, because it's so good to be back home with all of the incredible folks who work excellent, both with their minds and their hands, and that's what our new clean economy is all about. And I also want to thank Union 223. Being the child of a union family, I know how important it is to have strong union leadership and how to make sure that we have strong union jobs to build the foundation that the climate economy will be on. Today, we're going to unpack environmental justice and how it plays a role in our new clean economy. We're going to talk to folks from the streets to the suites. How y'all like that one? From the streets to the suites about how we make real change happen. How do we utilize policy? How do we make sure that infrastructure is one that builds a strong foundation, but at the same time, make sure that everyone is a part of the change that can and will happen? Because we know the climate crisis is at our doorstep today. But we also know that we have power to make real change happen. So I'm incredibly excited to bring forward our first panel. where we will focus on environmental justice, because we can't win on climate change if we don't win on environmental justice. So I'm going to invite the panelists to now come to the stage. We have an amazing panel as we get started. We have Dr. Abdul El Sayed, who's with us, Brian Lewis, Rosalind Obum, and our chair, Brenda Mallory from the White House, from the Council on Environmental Quality. So we are extremely blessed as we begin this first set of conversations. Chair Mallory, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk a little bit about the amazing work that's happening in the environmental justice space and the work that we still need to do.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mustafa. So it's such a thrill to be here and such a pleasure. I've already had such a great afternoon, starting off with a environmental justice advocate right here in Michigan, giving me a little bit of an insight on what's known as the most polluted zip code. And so I'm grateful to be here. As President Biden indicated in the video that we already heard, environmental justice is central to his agenda. It has been from the beginning of the campaign, and one of the things that's key about it is that it connects all of the other elements of his agenda. When COVID was number one, economic recovery was number two, the justice communities, and then climate change, of course, and all of those intersect around environmental justice issues and what we need to do in that area. And the White House Council on Environmental Quality is actually a central location within the administration for trying to make sure that we embed environmental justice across the government. So I'm just deeply excited to be here and to hear from everyone about the work that's going on around the communities. Thank you.
Well, let's get this panel started. Our moment, ending environmental injustice in Michigan. Dr. Sayed, I'm going to start with you. How do we make sure that Detroit is an example for communities across the country in centering environmental justice, especially when we talk about climate action? And how does Build Back Better play into that?
Yeah, well, I'm privileged to be here, honored to be with such an incredible panel. I want to speak to the central role that Detroit has in exemplifying some of the ways that we failed in the past and that we can succeed in the future. We know that the Detroit metro area is one of the most segregated in the entire country. That's not by coincidence. That is a matter of public policy, choices that were made by government about who could buy homes where and get federal subsidies. And as we think about the economy-defining moment that we're in right now, around pivoting to take on this scourge of climate change and to adapt to what it's already going to bring, I think we have the opportunity to demonstrate exactly how social policy and public policy can lead with and center those who've been harmed in the past. And the consequences of this aren't simply economic. I was the health director in the city of Detroit. 48217 was a zip code in the community for whom I was responsible. And when a petroleum refinery, one of many high-polluting corporations in that community, wanted to raise its emissions, the city stood up, and we were able to force them to reduce their emissions overall. But federal policy is different. It sets the frame of the debate. It sets the context around how we're going to take on a particular set of issues. And I think if we are willing to say, listen, the jobs that we will create by putting clean energy forward, the people whose lives we want to empower, ought to be the same people who were the victims of social policy in the past, then we will start with those communities, lead with those communities, and center them in the decision-making around how to take on challenges. And I just want to tie this back finally to this moment, which is the pandemic. All of us walked up here with masks on for a reason. And there was a recent study that came out in Science, one of the preeminent journals, and it found that the risk of serious COVID-19 and hospitalization was higher in communities where air quality was worse. So this is the context within which all of the other conversations we're having about COVID, about the economy, about our future, the context within which all of these are situated. And I think if we can lead with those folks who've been the victims of social policy, I think we have an opportunity not just to make up lost ground but to be thinking about true equity in the future.
Rosalind, in our country, we got 100,000 people who die prematurely from air pollution every year. And we know that as black and brown folks in lower wealth communities who often do. We also know that we've had 60 million folks who have dealt with unsafe drinking water over the last decade. And right here in Michigan, we saw what happened with the lead in the water, but we know there are many other communities across the country. How important is it for us to make sure that in the Build Back Better program, and with our infrastructure work that's going on, how do we make sure that we focus that in the communities that need it the most?
That's a good question. And like you said, Detroit is lifted up as right now the blackest community in the nation. And we are currently, while we're speaking, still dealing with lead in our pipes, right? And so to bring this conversation to everyone's kitchen table, to everyone's television, is to make this a constant heartbeat, especially when we're saying about this federal funding. While we're trying to survive COVID, we still being impacted with having dirty water. I was just touching base with this gentleman earlier and saying, we're talking about clean water and still saying affordable in the same conversation. But I wanna make sure the water is clean for our children. We realized in Flint, they identified that the water was dirty or contaminated because the animals were dying first. So what we wanna make sure is that our babies and our children have a future. You know, we can't put dollar amounts on life. Water is a human right. And so we need to make sure that the funding is available to put in the right infrastructures for our communities. And if you look at in the district that I live in, the economic or the income grid is between $24,000 to $28,000. And so at the beginning of before COVID, our city was actually asking people to pay for that infrastructure on their own from the street to the house. And so this is why this funding needs to be available to our residents, because we can't afford that. And so the uplifting of this, like we're saying, people dying due to contaminated water, and just like our federal representation lifted it up so elegantly, we still have people dying from bad air. And that we know there are corporate greed still turning up burning points every evening or when they can slide in due to meters not being able to read appropriately. So this is why we want to bring up the conversation at a high capacity to identify the contaminations that are happening in our communities every day. And then just putting the spotlight on corporate greed. They're paying lobbyists every day to hide this information for it not to be readily uplifted. So we must bring this conversation to the federal level and make sure the economics is available to educate and to bring these jobs to our communities. It is very important for us to have the transition to be able to have the education, to have the jobs to make to implement it. So thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for us making sure this conversation is going to be at our kitchen tables and on our table, in our televisions every day. So thank you.
And Rosalind, could you just share with folks also, because I was moving a little too fast in the beginning.
Okay.
Can you share with folks also your organization and some of the work that you focus on?
Yes. So I am a member of Sierra Club with the state chapter of Michigan, and then also the national political team. And I'm also the 13th Congressional Michigan Democratic Party environmental representative. And I'm also a candidate for a state representative in my district.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What's up, brother? How are you?
Oh, man, I'm just glad to be here.
Let them know who you are, who you represent.
Well, my name is Brian Lewis, and I guess I'm on this panel for a number of different reasons. First and foremost, I'm really glad to be here. I am a Detroiter, and so I speak from that perspective. I'm a young person in the city of Detroit, and I speak from that perspective. And I'm also executive director of an organization in the city of Detroit called EcoWorks. And I'm happy to talk about that, but we do a lot of amazing things with climate resilience and community resilience for Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the city of Detroit, and especially in Northwest Detroit. So I'm really excited to share that perspective. And when I'm thinking about building back better, one of the first questions that comes to mind for me is who's going to do that building, right? You know, I have the privilege of working, again, as executive director of EcoWorks, and we help to manage or implement DTE's Energy Efficiency Assistance Program in communities, which helps to install energy efficient appliances within people's homes who really, really need it. And especially if you know Detroit, you know we got some old homes, we got some beautiful homes, but we need some updating. And you know, we end up working with so many contractors, people that are sitting in this room, but many of those contractors are not from the city of Detroit. And we need to be able to prepare Detroiters to be able to build back better. Because if we don't do that, again, we're following the same rubric that put us in this position in the first place. And so that's what I'm really passionate about, is making sure that those dollars end up flowing not just to the city of Detroit, but through the city of Detroit to its residents to be able to build education, to build opportunity, and to build opportunity for people to flow into apprenticeships and skilled trades and the things that are actually going to make real life here on the ground, on the front lines better for real Detroiters.
So Brian, are you saying that if we truly are going to end the sacrifice zones that exist across our country, that we need to, one, I don't know, we have a Mike Pence moment going on right here. We need to make sure that not only are we helping to improve people's health, but also making sure that we are focused on building wealth?
We need economic opportunity.
Okay. Chair Mallory, Justice 40, we haven't called that out yet, and that's so incredibly important, and your administration, our administration, is actually focused on making that become a reality. How does that play into some of the things that Brian's talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for bringing that up. So Justice 40 is a commitment that the president made, again, on the campaign trail, but right from the day one on executive orders, that says that 40% of the overall federal benefits from investments in the clean energy and climate change activities will go to disadvantaged communities, to low-income communities. And so we've been working on setting up that program. Just a couple of months ago now, we issued interim guidance to all of the agencies on how to go about examining their programs in a way that will allow them to make the kind of investments that you're talking about. And we started off by focusing specifically on 21 programs that we were told from environmental justice advocates across the country, including those who are representing or working on the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, were programs that would be most impactful. So they are a range of programs. They deal with lead in housing, they deal with drinking water contamination, they deal with energy efficiency programs. And so the agencies now are basically examining, like, how would you deliver on this commitment? What do we have to do to make sure that the money reaches communities? What does the federal government have to do to restructure itself so that that's possible? So it's a work in progress, because shifting the way that money moves in the federal government is no easy task, but I think we are all committed to making sure that we deliver on this, and see it as an iterative process, right? Like, we're going to keep talking to the agencies, to the communities about what we're doing and whether it's working. The guidance also talks about measures, making sure that we have measures of accountability that we get back from the agencies to make sure that they're delivering. So it's an important first step, but it is a first step, and you're just going to keep on this track. So thank you for asking.
Most definitely. So, we all have known, we're just going to have real talk. Is that all right with everybody? So we know that we've seen millions of acres incinerated, right, from the wildfires. We've seen these biblical floods that continue to happen, these extreme heat events that are going on. And we know that environmental justice communities, frontline communities, are hit first and worst. Then, that there's no getting around that. How do you all see us being able to make sure that we're addressing those issues for our communities? And how does the Build Back Better plan and the sets of actions help us to be able to do that? So I'm going to open that up to whomever wants to go and take the first bite at that. Okay, Doc.
So one aspect of the entire conversation about climate change, you said we're going to real talk here.
Real talk.
Is that it's easy to talk about climate change as a series of iterative events, right? Climate change is, first it was the polar bears dying off, and then it was the melting polar ice caps, and now it's the floods and the fires, and these things are getting closer and closer to humanity in a real tangible way. Mm-hmm. But the churn of climate change isn't simply the iterative events that we can point to. Those are helpful to show what climate change is going to do. But the cost is often in the smaller things. It's in the water that's getting more and more poisoned as we put more and more pollutants in it, or as more and more people are drinking from the same water resources. It's the day-by-day leaking of pollutants into the air that our children breathe as they're playing in their playgrounds at kindergarten. And I think one of the things that we have to do is start moving beyond a conversation about climate change that A, centers these simple events, because when they stop happening, we stop paying attention. And B, I think we need to be thinking about the ways that the process that creates climate change itself is so sickening to people. And I think if we do that, it's an issue that we can pay attention to in real time, in local ways that center the local communities that get hurt. And so in a lot of ways, it's not just a messaging problem, it's a centering problem, right? Because it's too easy to say, well, climate change is over there, right? We don't have wildfires here, we don't have, you name it, right? The floods hit us, sure, that was that, but then those floods are gonna go away and maybe we're not gonna see them again until next summer. But this is an all the time thing. In a lot of communities, it is not one moment, it is not one event, it is the day-to-day grind and churn of living in a climate change world. The second point of that, though, is it helps us to center not just ending or stopping climate change, but adapting to the consequences. There was a really punishing study that came out that showed that in communities, right, where the schools didn't have enough money to buy basic mitigation like air conditioners, 1 or 2 degrees of heating fundamentally changes how kids do in school. But we don't talk about that because it's below what meets the eye. And so I think we have to reframe the way we talk about climate change to be thinking about the day-to-day churn and also about both slowing and hopefully stopping climate change, but also addressing the impact that climate change has on people today, now, in the communities in which we live and learn and work and play.
That's some real talk right there.
And I just want to add just a little sentence onto that. Oh, thank you. He hit it on the nail on the head. This, the revisioning, we must look at everything and what we do differently. The recycle, the reduce, the reuse is a real thing, right? If we start relooking at all of that, and then holistic, right? Going back to herb, medicinal. Though we realize our pharmaceuticals and our medicinal even merge, right? And so when we think about the things that we are on a cycle and a system that is doomed. And so I feel like the word transitioning is really a key word we should be looking at, because we must transition our thinking, transition in our vision, and transition in our money into new systems. So I think really that's the core piece that we really need to be uplifting. It's gonna be a hard push to transition those dollars differently, but if we don't really look at our water and what we're putting in it, if we don't look at the energy, the carbon imprint is killing us. And our temperatures are getting higher. We're not just talking about the polar bears and the ice cap. We're talking about us. We put a number out earlier this week, 1.5 degrees. We might not even get another 20 years. So I think it's the revision and how we're looking at things.
Well, Rosalind, we're running short on time. Brian, I'm gonna come to you here in 1 second. But since you got the mic, Rosalind.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What do we say to our lawmakers who don't want to believe scientists, who don't want to believe their constituents, who don't want to believe frontline communities? 30 seconds on how do we better engage with them, or how do we push them?
Well, we take them individuals that are being impacted when we say about the climate. When we have babies that have asthma that are living in the districts of 48217 or living next to the freeways or in homes that have not had piping and infrastructure replaced in years. When we take them to, when we say communities that have just been forgotten in Detroit, because a lot of people that don't live in Detroit, there are blocks with 1 or 2 homes on them that have been displaced. So I think when you bring the stories and show those individuals, these are people, these are real faces, and these are human bodies, you must do something, because this is also your voter.
Most definitely. Brian, we only got a couple of seconds left.
You know, I'll keep it quick. I always say that in order to change the narrative, you got to change the narrator. And we talked a little bit earlier about how we need to refocus and recenter ourselves in the conversation. It's really important to recognize that actions have consequences. So politicians, if you're out there, if you're not taking action, just know we will. People are voting with their feet, they're voting with their dollars, they're voting and they're taking action however they need to protect their own lives. So we're going to do what we need to do, and we need you all to do right by us at the same time.
There it is. So each one of these sessions, we're going to end it by saying, you have power unless you give it away. I want to thank our panelists for joining us for our conversation on environmental justice. So thank you. Can we give them a round of applause? All right, we're going to be bringing on our next set of panelists as our current panelists move to my right. All right, we're back, and we want to thank our previous panelists, and now we are going to dive a little deeper into our next session, Build Back Better, Labor and the Clean Energy Economy. I know everybody's excited about that. You know, folks are talking about these new sets of opportunities, and I'm going to go to Chair Mallory to talk just a little bit about the vision that's currently going on Capitol Hill, and then we're going to get into Michigan and how we expand the clean economy. Chair Mallory.
Great, thank you so much. And once again, I get back to President Biden from the campaign has made it very clear of how important the connection between labor and solving the problems that we have today. And I think more than any other president previously, I think the role that we see labor playing in this clean energy economy is crucial. Not just because the clean energy economy is where we are going in the future, but also he talks very passionately about what we as a country owe to the labor movement for building the country, building the industry to begin with. And so just very much of a moral sense of we owe people, they have things to contribute, and we're going to make sure that we make the adjustments in our economy that are necessary and integrate good union jobs in what we're doing in the future. So I'm looking forward to this panel.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. So let's go ahead and get it kicked off. We're going to just share who we are and our organization. So I'm going to start to my immediate left and give the mic to my brother.
Well, hello, everyone. Peace and blessings. Giving honor and thanks to the ancestors. My name is Theodore Spencer Bay. I am a union member of Local 58, IBEW, as well as community organizer, activist, etc.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Patrick Dillon. I'm Executive Vice President of the National Utility Workers Union of America, and very happy to participate in the program this evening.
And good evening, everybody. My name is James Shaw. I'm the Business Manager, Financial Secretary of the IBEW Local 17. I'm a journeyman lineman by trade and also a journeyman tree trimmer, and also happy to be part of the conversation today.
So there are over 50,000 clean energy jobs in the Detroit area, and we know that there are clean energy jobs across the state of Michigan. How does the Build Back Better agenda help to expand those sets of opportunities, and what are you looking for? Theo, why don't we start with you?
Well, first, I think what I'm looking for as a citizen of Detroit is that education be priority. So that the citizens of the city can have first access to these jobs, because a lot of the citizens, including myself, I didn't know about union trades. I didn't know about skilled labor. I had to find out through my travels in life, and that's probably why it took me so long to get involved. I'm a little older, and I think that is priority, making sure we reinvest as much money as possible, as much funds as possible into the educational infrastructure, starting from high school to post-high school as well. There are some programs that are in place, Access for All being one of them, which is the program that I give honor to because I came through that program. But making sure that we don't stop there with the 1 or 2 or 3 programs that may exist, but making sure that as much money as possible, as many resources as possible is devoted to education, so that people can be empowered to change the destiny that they thought they had no choice in. So just programs, job fairs, organizing, just the all around gambit.
I appreciate that. Patrick, I often talk about how folks here in Michigan work great, both with their minds and their hands. What opportunities do you see coming through both the Build Back Better agenda that we have and this incredible set of opportunities that we have in front of us?
Well, I think there are obviously a lot of opportunities out there, and you had started the discussion citing the number of green energy jobs in the Detroit area, and that there are many more across the state. And there's been a lot of talk about the number of jobs and the quality of those jobs. I think the importance of the Build Back Better plan and the focus on union jobs helps ensure that these are indeed good jobs. A lot of it becomes the definition of good when you talk about good green jobs. And the reality that we're seeing as organized labor is many of these jobs are not what we would consider good yet. The renewable energy industry is a burgeoning industry, and like any industry at its start, it does not have strong labor ties. Matter of fact, many of the employers in the green energy sector are resistant to unions and have yet to become unionized. I can tell you within the state of Michigan, we have many wind technicians. The only organized wind technicians are with the 2 major utilities. There's approximately 60 of them within the state between the 2 utilities, and the rest of them are unorganized. The pay difference between the organized and unorganized is not just the wages, but it's also the health care and benefits related to retirement. The simple fact is these jobs don't become union by themselves. And right now, the impetus is on the unions to organize them. It's extremely difficult because a lot of this work is transient. It moves from place to place, so it can be very difficult to organize the groups. And we need the Biden administration to push hard for the PRO Act to help level the playing field for workers in organizing.
Thank you for that. James, same question, and I just want to add a little flavor to it for you. The other part that I'd like for us to also talk about is the sets of opportunities that exist around advanced manufacturing. Because in many instances, those are in local, they're not going to be moving, and they give us an opportunity to actually help to build the infrastructure underneath of the infrastructure that when we talk about the new clean economy.
Yeah, not to reiterate what Pat said, but I mean, essentially, the piece is it's fine for us to go out and say that we have infrastructure dollars here, and we are going to build, an efficient green energy system out here. But when we do that, the employees and the people that are building that system, right down to the manufacturing of that system, deserve to have a say and deserve to be able to bargain for the wages that they're going to be able to get. What we find more than not is that when we do, just like Pat said, we try to go in and organize groups. There's a lot of pushback. So, what we're asking is that, from the Biden administration, who has been a great partner with the IBEW, and all of these jobs that are out here right now, the IBEW has 700,000 members across the United States and Canada that are essentially doing this work right now. They have the skills, they have the training, they have the licensing to do this work. And what we're asking is that, when we have other people that are in the energy sector that don't have a voice in that energy sector, is that we want them to join us. We want them to be part of us. We want to help them. And we want to make sure that the jobs that are coming out here, even if it's whether it's in the manufacturing sector or if it's by my trade, a lineman, because I am helping distribute all of that energy that's coming from clean energy. Those are all good paying jobs that provide health care benefits, that provide an income that you can raise a family on, allow you to retire at the end of your career. Now, mind you that these are not jobs, these are physical jobs of building. So the idea of working till you're 65 or 70 becomes very difficult because you're working with your body. So it's important that everybody understands that as much emphasis that's going into the dollars and cents to help create these jobs, that the workers have a voice and a say in how the work is going to get done, and that they have the ability to negotiate and have a fair living wage.
No, I can appreciate that. Coming out of the environmental justice movement, we often say that communities speak for themselves, that they have to be fully engaged in the development and the design and the implementation of the sets of actions. And coming out of a family, both my grandfather and my father as union workers, I understand what you're sharing with folks here today. I'm curious as we move through this conversation. Theo, I'll come back over here to you, and then we'll make our way back down. What do families in Michigan have to gain as we have a just transition? And I think just transition is really important in this conversation toward a clean economy.
As a family member and someone who works has worked directly with families in this social environment, just being able to remove that tree that's so big that they can't see the forest, it puts a family in a position to handle bills, to not be concerned about healthcare, to not be concerned about where the next meal, living paycheck to paycheck. And it allows them to be in a position to be concerned with what's going on around them, with what's going on with the environmental climate, with what's going on with the social climate. There's so many people who are not involved and just don't know what's going on because, again, that one tree, that bill, that car insurance that they can't afford to pay, it's too big. It's just too big to see around it, So I think that's what would be most beneficial.
Patrick, what do families, in your estimation, have to gain?
Well, I've got a unique perspective because I'll speak on behalf of 400 families that a little over a month ago were notified via a public service filing by one of the major utilities in Michigan that their coal generating plant would be closing as many as 15 years ahead of schedule. It'll close in 2025. And actually there are 4 associated plants in that situation. And so speaking on behalf of those 400 families, there's a lot of uncertainty. They know that the world is changing. They are certainly not science deniers and accept the transition to a cleaner energy economy. However, they don't know what that means for them as they face losing very good, high-wage, great benefit jobs working for the state utilities and they don't see that opportunity provided to them as replacement employment in the green energy sector. So there's a lot of apprehension, there's a lot of concern, and we have experienced a loss of membership through the closure of coal plants across the state of Michigan since approximately 2016. And these jobs that we talk about that have replaced them, we do not see. As I said, I've lost some 1,000 members that were in fossil generation, and I've got approximately 40 that are in wind generation. So we're far from apples to apples when it comes to the opportunities based on what we did have.
Right. So you're saying that we have some work to do. When we say a just transition, then we need to make sure that there's some certainty, especially for areas. We can map out, we know where things are, and we can make sure that we're directing resources into those areas to make sure that as we're transitioning, no one gets left behind. We often talk about no one getting left behind. We know that we have some huge opportunities in front of us in relationship to the reconciliation bill and that $3.5 trillion. Who knows, maybe folks will find some additional dollars. To make sure that communities like where I've come from, I grew up in Appalachia and here in Michigan, that we're focusing in those areas to make sure that people are made whole and that they're not left behind. Let me move to you, James, because I have a feeling that there's some additional things you might want to add in this space to help us.
Yeah, and that's what is important, is that people aren't being left behind, because there is an uncertainty in this nation that when there are plants that are closing, power generation plants, coal-fired plants, even like you said, you know, in the mountains of Appalachian, where these were good jobs that as they go away, are we focused on transitioning those employees, our members, into other jobs that are significant? And I want to probably correct this, because I don't want to say, I really think the term jobs is not what we're looking for. We're trying to create careers. You know, when somebody is going into a job, you know, that doesn't necessarily reflect a career, right? That's somebody going in and they're working. You know, when you go and get a career, that's something that you have aspirations to be there for a very long time, to be able to retire from there. That's a career. So, I mean, when we're talking about this, we should be talking about building careers, you know, in this type of sector, because that's what we're losing in many cases when we do start going to green energy. And we know we need to move in this direction. We need to do that, but we have to continue to build careers like we have in the future, even in like the coal industry. Those were careers that people worked their whole life, and generation after generation worked in those careers. Same in my field, in the electrical field. It's generations of people that have worked in these fields, so, and built careers.
And I'll just add, because we're getting short here on time, it's important for us to talk about careers. I think it's also important for us to talk about folks for the first time ever having the opportunity to be owners in a space, which we know that if you come out of a union, you're going to know how to treat folks. So if you start your own business, you're going to remember those lessons, and you're going to make sure that you incorporate that. And I think that creates stronger businesses and stronger sets of opportunities as we move forward with this clean economy. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I want to give everybody 5 seconds to say what your aspirations are for the future here in Michigan around the clean economy. So Theo, I'll start with you.
I think my aspirations for what I see out of this is radical love. Radical love, not just lip service, you know. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, if you're from Michigan, we often refer to ourselves as the winter wonderland. However, summer is best, and cleaner air, cleaner water, a cleaner environment. I just got back from being up north. It's beautiful, and we need to do everything we can to preserve that.
Definitely. James?
Yeah, I would agree. We have a pristine state here in the state of Michigan, and I think that really my aspiration is that all parties come together and that we can work through this so that each party essentially gets the piece that they need, and, you know, ultimately we can create something for our community and for our children and for future generations that come up that will sustain them in their future generations.
Well, I just want to thank each and every one of you for the real talk, because we need more real talk. We make sure that we strengthen these processes as we talk about labor and the clean energy economy. So thank you all for all that you do and will continue to do. And we will move on to our next section. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Hello, I'm U.S. Senator Gary Peters. And first off, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your incredible advocacy and dedication to addressing the urgent and existential threat of climate change. We've seen in Michigan how climate change poses a threat to our way of life and communities. And there's no question that we need to take meaningful steps now. There's simply no time to waste. I was proud to help the Senate pass bipartisan infrastructure legislation that included critical investments to address climate change, including the first ever national investments into electric vehicle charging infrastructure. I also secured $500 million for the STORM Act. I authored this legislation and it is now law. This funding will help communities in Michigan and across the United States to carry out mitigation projects that reduce the risk of natural disasters, including extreme flooding, shoreline erosion, and rising water levels. As we work to pass President Biden's Build Back Better budget, I'll continue fighting to ensure it includes policies that address climate change while creating good paying jobs and advancing clean electric vehicle technologies. Thank you again for all that you do.
We're now going to bring our next set of panelists to the stage. We're going to have an opportunity to actually get our conversation going with our state legislators, those folks who we voted for to make sure that real change happens, and they're working on it every day. I want to thank you all so much as we talk about the urgent need for bold climate legislation, both on the state level, and of course we know that's tied to the federal level. I'm going to let folks introduce themselves, and Stephanie, I'm going to start with you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Chang. I'm the state senator for Senate District 1, which is Detroit and Downriver. It's a great district and very much has a lot of frontline, EJ community, environmental justice communities that have been very much at the forefront of what we're talking about today.
I'm State Senator Mallory McMorrow. Hello to everybody watching at home or on your phone or wherever you're streaming it. And I represent the suburbs just north of Detroit. So we go up Woodward and I-75, the home of the Woodward Dream Cruise. And we are a community that is still out of power. A week after we had storms here last Wednesday, we still have about 100,000 people still struggling with it. So this is why it's so important that we talk about these issues now.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Abraham Ayash. I have the honor of serving my community in House District 4, which includes Hamtramck and parts of Detroit. My district houses a lot of factories and waste facilities, as well as Factory Zero, where the new Hummer will be built.
And of course, we have with us Chair Brenda Mallory from CEQ. Brenda, I'm going to let you kick it off. But you have worked for years with state representatives, of course, and of course everyone on the federal level as well. How important is it to make sure that our state representatives have what they need, the resources, the tools, the information, so that we can make sure that we're making positive change happen?
Well, thank you so much. I mean, it's critical, in a word. I will say, as someone who has spent most of my professional career in the federal government, the one thing that I know for sure is that the partnerships and connections that occur with the state and local government are hugely important to the success that we're able to make. And I was just in California last week, and one of the things that was just both so inspiring and striking was to see
just some great work that was being done around wind energy in one place, where it was a local community, the business leaders, the federal government, all coming together to work towards success, and a lot of anticipation about the funding that would come from the Build Back Better agenda. So I think this is really important for what we need to do, and it's the only way that we're going to actually be successful is if we have that. So thank you. Thank you for what you do.
Representative Chang, I'm going to start with you. Michigan has already made some would say some significant changes in addressing the climate crisis and the impacts that are happening from climate change. Although there are some who may not yet understand why moving forward with strong, bold legislation is so incredibly important, both on the state level, the county level, and the local level. What would you say to those folks?
Well, what I would say to folks is, let's remember that not too long ago, and still to this day, we've got people who are still dealing with the ramifications of sewage that was in their basements from the flooding in late June and in early July. And we know from the recent UN report that this problem is only going to continue to get worse, and that we need action now. I think that when you have folks literally in their neighborhoods losing cars to the flooding, entire cars having to replace their hot water heaters, their furnaces, losing cherished memories, hearing a woman, losing all of her wedding photo album, just all of these things. I think people are starting to, if they weren't already there, I'm hoping that we can really use this moment to remind folks of how urgent this is. We've got the outages happening as well, and we've got people who in some cases have dealt with flooding numerous times now. And so I think that people hopefully more and more are realizing that we do need action now, and we need action that is going to be comprehensive, that will happen at the state, local, and federal level, and that we're addressing climate change in a lot of different ways. My colleagues and I are working on bold climate resilience legislation. Of course, we need to do more on the front end as well. How do we slow climate change? But we've got a lot to do, and really the time is now. I think that people are more and more realizing that we need bold action, and we need it now. Any week without action is a week too late.
Representative McMorrow, you are dealing with the climate crisis, the impacts that come out of that in this particular moment. One, how important is it for legislation? But two, when you have these types of situations that you're currently dealing with, does it help to get folks to pay more attention, to understand the urgency of the moment, or are there other techniques that you may have to use to be able to move the needle to better help to protect folks?
It's a great question, and I think living in this moment, we see a lot of parallels, fortunately or unfortunately, to COVID-19, where if you didn't lose somebody personally early on, or I have a hospital in my district that was hit so hard early, and the number of people who worked there and saw the impact of it early on, you didn't believe that it was real. And I think that's what we see with climate, where unless you are dealing with it personally, there are still folks out there, even though the scientific consensus is that not only is climate change real, but our actions are accelerating it. You can't ignore multiple 100-year floods in the span of a few weeks. You can't ignore, we had a gust of wind at 60 miles an hour that knocked down trees all over my district, and people are still out, and their prescriptions are being funneled to other pharmacies, and people are spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars of their own money on generators and hotel stays, and you are paying for it because we are not taking action, because we are still building our infrastructure for a time that does not exist anymore. People are bearing that on their backs, in their paychecks, and I think right now you can't ignore that it's here and it's at our doorstep and it's happening every single day.
I so appreciate all the points that you just made, but we often have such a difficult time in helping people to understand that we can no longer utilize a 20th century set of infrastructure in our country, that we have to have a 21st century set of infrastructure that's actually being built in a way, and that's why I appreciate the Build Back Better program, so that we're ready also for the 22nd century, right? So that we make the investments now. Representative, I'm coming to you. I'm curious, for your constituents, What are some of the greatest needs that you and others are working on to help folks to be able to deal with the climate crisis?
You know, you can't talk about fixing and addressing climate change without talking about economic and environmental justice. Growing up in Hamtramck, I would walk to school and we would smell toxic odors from the Detroit incinerator. And that was something that we thought was normal. And it's that sort of psychology of this is just the way things are, that it is not right. And we see this oftentimes in black and brown communities where pollution is normalized, right? Dirty water is somehow something that is okay. When you turn on your tap, I mean, you look at the Flint water crisis, for example, people opening up or turning on their water and seeing brown come out, that was stuff that folks just thought, this is just the way it is, right? And it's not right to sort of accept that as the norm. And I'm glad that we're finally going green, but you know, you can't go green without elevating and uplifting black and brown communities. You know, just in my district alone, we had a huge facility that was seeking to expand their treatment of wastewater and toxic sludge from 60,000 gallons to 660,000 gallons, right? You're talking about a 10 times fold of increase in some of this stuff. And just this year, they're actually renewing another permit where they're dealing with solid waste. So one of the big issues for us is climate changed, infrastructure hasn't. Climate changed, our regulations have not. And climate changed in the way we invest in our communities has not. So for us, one of the first things and one of the stuff that we fight for so hard is changing the regulatory standards in Michigan. You can pretty much walk in as a factory and get a permit and walk away with impunity so long as you're meeting the bare minimum threshold. So, you know, corporations are racing to the top, right? How far can we go in releasing emissions before we get in trouble? And then they calculate some of these fines and things of that nature into their budgets, into their operating budgets. So earlier this year, we introduced the Protecting Overburdened Communities Act, POCA, as we call it for short, that would fundamentally change how we do our permitting process to take into account the public health impacts of our communities.
Just to unpack that a little bit, because I had a chance to actually take a peek at that, how important is us being able to address the cumulative impacts that are happening inside of communities, especially as legislators? You have the opportunity to actually do some work in that space. So anyone who'd like to unpack that maybe just a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, you know, so I'm just thinking back to 2014 when I was first running for office. I don't think I knew what cumulative impact was in that moment, but I certainly learned from my Southwest Detroit activists pretty quickly what that meant. And so, you know, just thinking about Southwest Detroit, where you've got an oil refinery not too far away, a steel mill, actually 2 steel mills, as well as a coal-fired power plant that has since been retired, and you got the international truck traffic going across the bridge. And, you know, cumulative impact is something that residents in Southwest Detroit and Downriver know very well what that means, because they're breathing it and they're living it, they're smelling it, and they know that our laws are not catching up quite as much as we need to. But we have introduced legislation over the past many years. Haven't quite gotten the final push, but that will make sure that we are taking into consideration what is the cumulative impact of all of the various pollutants from all of the various sources before that permit is issued. Because I think that it's not enough to look at this permit and then this permit and this permit, or this type of pollutant and then that type of pollutant. We've got to look at things in a more holistic way, because we know that the air people are breathing doesn't discriminate based on where it's coming from or what type of pollutant it is.
And to touch on Senator Chang's point, the problem is we always look at these issues as if they're in silos. But the reality is these emissions are going out all into the same place, right? There's one atmosphere that it's all being released to. There's one water system that it's all going into. So to try to say, well, we can emit this much sulfur dioxide here, and we can emit this much mercury release in our water there, and maybe it's not going to affect everybody, in total, but you're seeing concentrations, right? We had, like I said, the Detroit incinerator burning trash in our backyards. And just half a mile away, you have radioactive waste at one point that was being treated. And then just a mile the other way, you're looking at solid waste and dust particles that are being released. And then a mile and a half down the street, you see things like the refinery, and then just half a mile from that, you see a steel mill. So you're seeing high concentrations of these areas, and it's not just impacting these communities. You look at Dearborn, for example, kids have higher rates of asthma in the South End, which is just 15 minutes from here, because they cannot breathe due to all of the steel mills and all of the Ford factories that are that are here right now, that are just constantly releasing stuff. And the scary thing is, the companies say it's more profitable to continue as is. Again, calculating these fines into their systems, and that's just an unjust system.
And if I could just add, so I represent a very different district than my colleagues here. I represent a traditionally very conservative district. And the cumulative impact that we see is different. You know, we don't have the environmental issues that some of my colleagues face that are very real. But what we're starting to see is there is a cumulative financial and economic impact as well, where, you know, the power issue is a perfect example, where I have residents who just accept that they have to spend $500, $1,000, up to $10,000 to get a generator installed because the power is unreliable, because we've built it the same way that we always have. I have businesses who can't find talent to fill jobs that they have. And when you talk to young people, you know, that's an issue that I've focused on, is how are we attracting and retaining diverse, qualified young people in the state of Michigan? And people don't see that we as a state are making the investments in protecting our environment and making sure that our communities are safe and welcoming. And that all adds up. And we're starting to build, you know, an alliance with many of my constituents who may not have ever voted in the same way that we may vote, and kind of align ourselves with them, but because they see the impact as well, and it's hitting their pocketbooks. It's no longer just about, I don't want to talk about taxes, it's I'm paying for it because governments, companies are not. I have to carry that weight.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, one of the things that it seems like we still have work to do is to help folks to understand that we're all in this together. We're all interconnected. If, you know, we support the Build Back Better plan that we have, and if we are rebuilding our grid, everyone benefits from that. And it helps to lower cost, as you just mentioned. And it also helps to make sure that we're also improving air quality as well, because we're moving away from those fossil fuels. Let me just stop and say, we need to break the addiction to fossil fuels. All right, I'm back now. So with that being said, you know, we talked earlier about how in Michigan there are a number of clean economy and clean energy jobs that are moving forward. In your district, how important is this transition, this just transition, moving forward over the next, let's say, over the next decade? I'll start with you.
Well, I've got to say, I think that this is such a critical question right now. How do we make sure that we are moving our state and our country forward in a way that is protecting our communities from flooding, protecting our communities from massive power outages, and creating jobs? I mean, and creating cleaner air, and all of these things. I think that we are at a critical moment right now where we have to make this choice about how do we move forward in a way that is protecting our workers' rights, creating union jobs, that is creating more resilient communities through the infrastructure upgrades that we need to do that are decades overdue, that is resilient infrastructure. How do we create these clean energy jobs that should be union jobs? How do we do all of these things and also make sure throughout this entire process that we're centering our frontline communities and making sure that they are the ones leading the way? So I'm excited by this conversation and really feeling hopeful.
Yeah, I just think, I mean, this is such a golden opportunity for Michigan. What I love about this state, and I have lived all over the country and I came from the auto industry, we created the American auto industry. We are a state that is more innovative and has more skills in manufacturing than any other state in the country. So this is our opportunity to show the rest of the country and the world that we can do this. We can do it together. We can bring everybody along with us. And, you know, my district is home to engineers and designers and builders and manufacturers and people who are passionate about solar. And if we lift the solar cap, just thinking about how many more jobs we can create. And it is not something to shy away from. It's something that we have the unique capabilities that nobody else has. But we have to harness this moment now before it passes us by.
You know, I come from a UAW family. So Michigan already has a lot more going for us than any other state. Right? We have the infrastructure to build quickly. We have all these factories. We have all of these places that people are accustomed to working. Right? We are a working class state. So the apparatus is there. Right? We just got to tap into it. Folks recognize what it means to organize labor. Folks recognize what it means to build, you know, vehicles and mechanisms that put the world on wheels and connected this country, right? Things like the internet was first developed here at U of M, although I'm a proud MSU guy. But, you know, there's opportunity there. And it's just a matter of just waking people up, say, hey, we got a green energy economy that we can move forward. Joe Biden's investing in this Build Back Better plan, and the people are ready to work.
Well, I think you've heard it. The urgent need for bold climate legislation is now. It's on the state level. And of course, we've got to make sure that we're pushing those on the federal level to do the right thing. Can we give them a round of applause? Thank you all so much.
Hi, I really wish I could be with you this evening for this very important discussion. We have seen the climate crisis right in front of us, given what's happened with all of the flooding and the problems with infrastructure in Detroit and southeastern Michigan. We've got a lot of work to do there, and we've got a lot of work to do everywhere. I'm right now up in the UP, and I'm raising the alarm bells everywhere I go, because we know that the Great Lakes are now warming faster than the oceans, and Lake Superior, which I'm standing beside right now, is one of the top 5 fastest warming lakes in the world. So we've got to move, and we've got to move quickly, which is why I'm working in the Senate, one of the climate warriors that's focused on making sure that our budget results in a 50% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030. I'm leading the electric vehicles piece of this, working with colleagues on the clean electricity standards, on renewables. I'm all for a price on carbon. I'm for whatever package we can put together that's going to get this done. And as chair of the Agriculture Committee, I've been leading very important efforts on regenerative agriculture and sustainable forestry, which are important pieces of the puzzle. We've got a lot to do. We've got to make sure it works for everybody. Environmental justice has to be a top priority on every policy we put in place. And I know that if we stay focused together and keep our energy going, we're going to get it done. So thanks for being here this evening.
Please welcome back Mustafa Santiago Ali.
All right, I am incredibly excited about this next conversation that I am about to have because I get a chance to actually navigate through many of the things that we've discussed today with 2 huge champions. One you've heard from, Brenda Mallory, chair of CEQ, and then Representative Dingell, Debbie Dingell. I cannot tell y'all how excited I get every time that I'm in the space with her, because I know that she's gonna drop some real knowledge and that she's a champion for the state of Michigan and for our country. So could we bring them to the stage now? Let's give them a round of applause. Well, Chairman Mallory, you've been with us throughout these number of sessions and segments that we've been doing. I know you're excited. What are some of the takeaways that you've seen and felt and heard here today?
Yeah, well, first of all, it was just so powerful. Each group, experts, people who are working hard, doing the things that are necessary to try to move this country in a positive direction. I think in terms of specific issues, I was very struck in the first panel, the environmental justice panel, where the focus was on the health issues that people are dealing with the connection between the environmental issues and those health problems, the presence of pollutants that are directly related to those conditions. So I, was very touched by that. In the labor panel, I think the fact that we are in a transition. I mean, we know that we are trying to move the country in a certain direction, and there's a gap for those people who just lost their jobs. In the last week, 400 jobs that that person spoke about, and they don't see what the immediate connection is, and that's like the anxiety around that is real, and I think is recognized. And as an administration, and I would say as a government, like we're trying to deal with that as quickly as possible, because there's no question that when you're wondering what that next job is, that's a hard situation. And then I think that last panel just so inspiring, and back to the point I made at the very beginning, which is at the local level, the folks who are in the state who are working in specific communities around these issues are just such powerful advocates and partners, and just I think it's going to be so important for the work that we have going forward. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, and I know you appreciated the real talk.
It was, I mean, you know what? I knew that I was going to get real talk because you were here.
Right, and we should just say real quickly also, because we'll get in trouble if we don't, and I know we want to, the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Committee also has representatives who are from Michigan, who are a part of it, who are sharing information from folks who are on the front lines about the things that we need to do. Do you want to just touch on the
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the real strengths of the Advisory Council in general is it's pulling from folks all across the country, but specifically there are folks here. And the value of that is exactly the issue that I was mentioning, which is, you know, it's one thing to talk about environmental justice as a generic issue. It's another thing when you have people who can give you real examples of specific things that are happening on the ground and specific solutions, right? Like, it's not just that here's this big problem, like, you know, dump on you, go deal with it. No, people have been thinking about these issues. They have ideas about like what would really be a responsive you know, suggestion to move forward, and they've just been great partners in terms of sharing. So, thank you for doing that.
Oh, most definitely. Representative Dingle, one, I know that you've been a champion for environmental justice. We've had conversations before about that. From your vantage point, at this moment in time, why is it so important for us to be taking bold sets of actions to address the climate crisis?
So first of all, welcome home. It's really good to see you. And I'm very honored to have the chairman here, and actually it is my district that we're in today, so that's great. Actually, the panels tonight are very important to listen to and to understand that each of their perspectives is absolutely critical as we have this discussion. Because the reality is we got another red alert. You know, when the United Nations couldn't have flashed stronger, we're in trouble. And it's happening faster than anybody thinks it is. But by the way, if you live in Dearborn, we've had 5 once-in-a-lifetime storms in 6 weeks. You know, I'm older than 6 weeks, and so are a lot of other people. And you heard you heard about people who are living in these communities and are dealing with the effects every day of dirty air, dirty water, dirty ground, and they've been left behind. But it was also really important, too often, and I think this is the most important thing we have to talk about as we talk about the need for bold action, is we are constantly making false choices. It is not, we have to worry about our future and the environment or jobs, but you can't do both. The fact of the matter is, we have to do both. And, you know, a lot of the efforts in the last few years haven't had labor at the table, which has been, as you know, you've heard me talk about it, a major problem that, and I, by the way, going to tell everybody here tonight, lose the word green jobs. If you're a union worker and you hear somebody say green job, they hear one thing. They don't think about the environment. They don't think about how they're being impacted or what's happening to their air or the water. They hear, my job's going away. And not only do they hear their job's going away, if they're going to get another one, it's going to pay less. The fact of the matter is that I introduced the Thrive Act, which was a very intentional, I did it with Ed Markey, did it on the Senate side, and it's a very intentional, intersectional plan that would transform our economy. It invests in, but not only does it address, and it would upgrade our infrastructure, improve it, but it would help us go from fossil fuels to solar, to other alternative wind, other alternative forms that don't contribute to the carbon. But it would also empower communities that need to be heard, that have been ignored and not. It would require the president to appoint a Thrive, I forget the word we used in the bill, but the Thrive Committee would be appointed from unions, from communities that have been so badly impacted by environmental justice. And it would have the very people that would be impacted the most would be on that commission. Commission's, I think, the word we used. But we're in trouble. I mean, here, you're in Dearborn, Michigan. We've got 20,000 homes that have been impacted in the last 6 weeks. We've seen wildfires no one's just talking to us about melting glaciers, or we're living it. We see what's happening in California. We see the hurricane season. How our communities are being impacted across the country with these drastic weather changes. We had the hottest month on record in July. We are all living this. But instead of being afraid my job's going away, we got to work together. We need to go back to, this is my favorite statement for a whole lot of things. United we stand, divided we fall. It's time for bold action. It's time to protect jobs, bring our supply chain back to this country, make sure that people have good paying jobs, and protecting the communities that have been so adversely impacted, not for years, but for decades, a century.
Well, I appreciate you talking about intersectionality, because sometimes we don't pay enough attention to that. You know, when we look at the sets of opportunities inside of communities, we're talking about housing, we're talking about transportation, we're talking about public health. You know, we are talking about jobs, so many different types of things. What are the policies that you are excited about? I know the Thrive Act is one of those that you're super excited about.
Well, Thrive is, I actually have a lot of pieces in Build Back Better. And by the way, we need to start talking about Build Back Better. People don't, I am somebody who thinks that the bipartisan infrastructure bill was important. I think we all know we need to replace our roads and our bridges, and the pandemic shined a light on how many people don't have access to internet and broadband, the inequality that exists in this country on all of that. But I also think we're being divided by fear and hatred in this country, and when you can bring us together and agree on anything, that's very good. I'm focused on, let's start with electric vehicles. The transportation sector accounts for 30% of the carbon in this country. We have to do something. I was with the president at the White House 2 weeks ago when he announced a target of 50% electric vehicles by the year 2030. And by the way, we got to keep, this red alert was real. We got a problem. But people aren't going to have confidence in buying that electric vehicle if we don't have a battery that has range, if we don't have an infrastructure that they can plug in, if we don't upgrade the power grid. And oh, by the way, in order to have a sustainable power grid, we do need to have other forms of but we need to make sure that those jobs are there. We need to be creating the new jobs. And the vehicles need to be affordable. So and it's not going to happen. We're not going to get there if we're not intentional and intersectional about what we do and put in this bill, which is why the Build Back Better bill that we're all working on matters. I also, both Thrive and the family, I don't know what we're going to end up calling it. We've had a lot of discussions, and it confuses all of you that are listening. But child care and long-term care are also equally important, and I'm leading the long-term care piece in this too. There are too many people that, and when you talk about both child care and long-term care, it's women of color that are the major providers. And I know women that are working 2 jobs and still living below the poverty line and have no benefits. And that's an important part of action now.
And, you know, we often talk about hard infrastructure. Natural infrastructure is incredibly important. We know the beauty that exists inside of Michigan, and we know that we need to protect it. And then we also know, as you just mentioned, with the American Families Plan or whatever the label will be, that we've also got to strengthen that infrastructure as well, because we know there have been hospitals and clinics that have closed that, one, if we can build them back better and making sure that they are actually utilizing on cleaner forms of energy, that they also are opportunities for jobs there. You take a holistic view of communities when you're creating legislation.
Always. You know, I looked up the Oxford Dictionary definition of infrastructure was systems or processes that allow a country or corporation or community to operate. Well, what's more important than childcare and long-term care and people not having to worry? So we need to be thinking about all of this. And we got a crisis in this country. There's just no question about it. And the people that are paying the price are those who can least afford it too. Even when you were just having that generator discussion, or I'm listening to the whole discussion, the people that need it the most can't afford it. They can't afford a generator. You talk about, you know, over here, right now you're in 48126, which is in my district, and you have a school that is frequently used as an example next to a steel plant, and the kids, I had an asthma attack when I was doing a town hall meeting at that school. And yet they can't afford, a mother showed me the inhaler that cost $800 and she doesn't have insurance. These are all issues that matter as we are talking about all of this right now.
Without a doubt. I mean, we've got 25 million people in our country who suffer from asthma, 7 million kids, disproportionately as African American and Latinx children who are the ones who are going to the emergency rooms. So as they're out there trying to help folks to understand the value of addressing the climate crisis, of making sure that we are having a holistic way of addressing our infrastructure sets of needs and broadening that set of conversation, are you seeing your constituents beginning to better understand the value in that space? And here's an additional question that someone posed to me. And how do we help folks who have not yet evolved to that position to get there?
So, okay, if you're living in Dearborn and you've been flooded, and when the minute you see the weather report, look, my basement's been flooded 3 times in the last few years. People just freak out. So if you're living in Dearborn and you understand that your infrastructure is 100 years old or 70 years old and it's outdated and it's not built for the 21st century, and oh, by the way, you want to know, is that infrastructure money in Washington going to fix it? And I'm truthful with people. It's not going to fix it overnight. It's going to take time, it's going to take a lot of money, and you're not going to get it if you don't have a plan, so we need to get a plan. And I'll give you another, we have not talked about enough, which is very critical when we do this climate action now and we do this infrastructure bill, is water. I was someone that really took the lead with Rashida, but I went back when I left here last March when COVID started and everybody was saying, you gotta wash your hands, and water had been turned off in how many communities? Detroit particularly. I said to the speaker, Nancy, we're telling people the most important thing they can do is wash their hands, but do you know how many communities across this country don't even have water, running water? Think of the public health implications of that. And then this bipartisan bill has a little money, but I don't know a Republican or a Democrat in this country that thinks a child should be drinking water with lead in it. And yet, Do you know how many children are? You know, Flint caught the nation's attention, but do you know how many communities across the country still have lead pipes? It's just wrong, and we have to eliminate that. Flint puts a child's face on it for some people, but we got to keep talking to people. The workers, look, I talk to a lot of auto workers that are scared. They think their job's going away. I talk to utility workers. Their job has gone away. So we have to be, that's why I brought the UAW and all of the presidents of all of the environmental groups, as you know, to the same table to talk about how you address it, how we make sure that we do both, that we are intentional and intersectional. We're not going to cost our jobs. We're going to make sure we build those batteries here in the United States of America, that we are going to bring the supply chain back. We're going to create more jobs. We have to be very intentional and intersectional. I'm tired of people that wave these magic wands and say, do this and do that, and don't do the detail. I'm very focused on the detail. We got to make it happen. We don't have a choice.
I appreciate that. I often say there has to be intentionality. If not, we end up missing and leaving gaps in the process. Chair Mallory, I see you raising your microphone.
I'm raising my mic because I just want to say this is an example of why Congressman Dingell is so important, and her leadership has been so important on these issues. And I'm just like, I'm inspired just listening to her, but I just know on that notion of the cars in particular and bringing the leaders together on that, just what an important role you played. So thank you for everything you do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And you raised about EVs, you know, and charging stations. So folks hear me talk about charging stations and the opportunities that are going to exist all across our country to build that network. I'm curious, when we have these conversations about these new sets of opportunities and we talk about intentionality, how do we also make sure that the communities who have often been forgotten, and I know you've done work in bringing people to the table, how do we make sure that Black and brown and indigenous communities and lower wealth white communities are going to have the opportunities around ownership and working, and as we talked about in the previous panel, the careers that are going to be needed?
So this is really complicated. And I've introduced the Thrive Act, which would have, but I'm really worried that that's not going to be, you know that I worry about that, Madam Chair, that's not going to be, and we really do. When we're talking about electric vehicles, I say the first time how many people don't have a garage? Everybody says, oh, people can charge overnight. You know how many people don't have a garage? Do you know how many people don't have access to that outlet? Do you know how many people can't afford, I'm about to say a name and I shouldn't, but I'm going to say it. How many people can afford a Tesla? A Tesla is a luxury vehicle. We have to make sure that everybody can afford that vehicle and have access to it, and how are they going to charge it? So we have to make sure that we are building that infrastructure so it's in those communities that can least afford it, because they can't afford the vehicle, they can't afford the charging, they can't afford to put the infrastructure, and they don't even have a garage to do it. So that's what I mean. We can't just take this paintbrush and say, build it out. It ain't going to happen if you do it that way. We have to make sure that we are focused on the communities that, and many of them don't have access to transportation, period, which is another whole issue. We need to take we need to build out transportation services. It's not one of Michigan's strengths, as you know, but we have to make sure we're converting that and converting buses and school buses to the electric vehicles too. But we have to make sure that these communities are the communities that we are the most focused on, because they don't have the money to afford it.
I appreciate that. Transportation justice, economic justice, housing justice, energy democracy, all of these are so incredibly important as we're moving forward. I know we're almost out of time, but I have to ask this question. You know, the importance of this moment with the Build Back Better plan, with the investments that are going to happen, both from the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the reconciliation bill, position us to be able to take advantage of these opportunities. If we don't, on the international level, do you feel that others will fill that space?
They're filling it. One of the reasons this bill is so important is I'm never going to let China win. You know what? Where we are right now put the world on wheels. We were at the
forefront of innovation and technology, and we can't afford to lose that space. I know we've got the know-how. I know we can do it. We've got the skill set. We've got the workers, and we have to make sure we continue to equip them with the skills that they need to continue to lead that. We need to be investing. One of the things I didn't mention on batteries that we have right now, the minerals that are used in batteries, 80% of it are in China. We have to, and do it in a way that's environmentally friendly. By the way, I'm not into all this, I'm about to say gobbledygook, because it is sometimes. You know, workers or even hear those words and it goes right over their heads. We need to use language that people use at the dinner table every night. That helps us be bold and get done what's got to get done. But we need to be mining those minerals here in a sustainable way, probably another gobbledygook word, but and we have to keep ourselves at the forefront of this innovation and technology. I say to my friends, there's been a lot of fighting among people in the last couple of weeks. We need this bipartisan bill because it brings us together. We cannot, Republicans cannot. I'm an American. I want to say that. I'm an American. We cannot lose this once in a lifetime, not generational, once in a lifetime opportunity to ensure the future of our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. And if we blow this by pissing each other off, or I shouldn't have used that word, but I'm going to, or fighting with each other, instead of figuring out how we're going to get this done, it's on all of us. Because then we do need to worry about what our future really is going to be.
Representative Dingell, I appreciate the real talk, and I appreciate all the work that you continue to do to uplift our most vulnerable communities and our country as a whole. Chair Mallory, thank you so much for the work that you have been doing for a long time now at a very high level. Can we give them a round of applause? And we will hold for a moment as we transition to the next part of our program. Everyone can please rise.
Hello, everyone. I want to start off by introducing myself. My name is Jasmine Maciel Gutierrez. I'm a resident in Southwest Detroit. I also want to thank Adonis for inviting me here. And I also want to thank Climate Action Now for having me. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the personal side of the flood. I have been living in my home for 15 years. I live in Southwest Detroit, but the night of June 26th was something that my family and I have never seen before. I was woken up at 1:15 by my neighbors that there was a flood. Didn't really think anything of it because floods always happen. Something normal, we know what to do at the time. But when I looked out the window, I no longer could see the tires on my car because they were flooded. By the time that I get to my basement, there was around 7 feet of water in my basement. There was no way for me to salvage anything. When I wake up my parents, it was chaos. I have a 4-year-old brother. He was the first one to go upstairs. We tried to get everything out and important documents out. By the time it was 1:30, the water was one doorstep away from coming into our first floor. When I look out in our front yard, it looked like an island. We couldn't go outside. If we waited a little bit longer, if the rain kept going, it would have went inside of our first floor. Like I said, we've been living there for 15 years. It's 15 years of hard work, money, memories just gone. Food that people donated to us because of the pandemic, gone. Washers, dryers, my college memories, my brother's things for school, gone. It hit us really bad when we knew that our cars were completely gone. There was more than 60% of water in our vehicles, so any means of transportation was gone. Now, here is where the issue is. A lot of people don't understand that climate change has an effect on our flooding, and that's where the issue is, where our communities are not being informed, they're being misled. And I'm glad that we have these type of events, because we do need to let our communities know that climate change is affecting our homes. And I want to thank a lot of communities who were reaching out to us, making sure that we were okay, but unfortunately a lot of families cannot say that. The undocumented community was affected the most. For a lot of the funding that is offered, you have to have a Social Security, and they did not have that. And that is where the issue is, because these are frontline workers, these are essential workers, and they're receiving no funding, no resources, no help by any means. And that's not fair, because these people are waking up every morning and working, making sure that fruit, that vegetables are being put in our homes, that our deliveries are being delivered, and they receive no help at all. And that's where the issue is, and we need to have our representatives who we elected be there for us. Fund into climate change, fund in infrastructures. We need to have funding in these communities because they were vulnerable. My family was vulnerable, but I'm grateful that my family has myself and my sisters who will not stay silent when it comes to these issues, but a lot of families do not have that opportunity to be vocal. So I'm here in representation of those families who don't have that opportunity to voice their opinions, to voice the issues that are surrounding in their communities. And a lot of change will be done if they just listen to us. It's one thing to look at statistics, but it's another thing to hear personal stories. So I want to thank everyone for listening, and we need to act now. There's a reason why we elected these officials, and now it's time for them to respond to us, to be there for us, and to give us the resources that we need. Thank you.
Please welcome back Mustafa Santiago Ali.
All right, we want to thank everyone for joining us in the Great American Build Out Tour. I want to thank my Indigenous brothers and sisters who have allowed us to hold space on their land. I want to thank all of the frontline organizations, the environmental justice organizations who continue to fight diligently each day to make sure that justice becomes a reality for all of us. I want to thank the League of Conservation Voters, Climate Power. I want to thank our state and federal representatives who joined us today to be able to unpack the policies that are going to be necessary for us to win on the climate crisis and for us to build a strong and vibrant nation. I want to thank our union brothers and sisters who each day get up and do the work and help to make sure that we have a stronger foundation underneath of us. So we got to make sure that as we're moving forward on this new clean economy, that we have strong union jobs and union representation inside of that mix. I want to thank my Michigan family for continuing to be these amazing champions, both for natural infrastructure and man-made infrastructure and human infrastructure. And I want to thank everyone who is here in our COVID-safe audience, distancing, as we went through and unpacked many of the tough sets of conversations that are going to need to happen. But we know that in the end, we all have to come together. Dr. King shared with us an amazing quote as I close out. He said that we come to these shores in different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. When we think about the impacts that are happening from the climate crisis, we're all in it together. But we also know that there's a North Star. That North Star is justice. And a new clean economy can be a part of that as long as we're intentional in making sure that the voices that are often unseen and unheard are a part as we move forward. I'm Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali. Thank you all for a few moments of your time. Now you have the charge to go out and do something to make sure that the work that needs to happen becomes a reality. Thank you so much.